Hello, my name is Omar Sanchez and I'm a rising senior at the University of Florida, and I'm part of the Ronald E. McNair Scholars Program. My mentor is Dr. Paul Ortiz of the Department of History at the University of Florida, and today I will be presenting on my working research titled The Comparative Analysis of Ethnic Studies in Higher Education. As first generation minority students can attest, they often don't see themselves within your school's curriculum. It's not until college that most students are able to learn about their communities in academia. But some students still aren't granted this privilege because of the lack of ethnic studies in certain regions of the United States. For my presentation, I will be talking about the varying degrees of ethnic studies programs that exist within higher education in the United States, specifically comparing San Francisco State University, University of California, Berkeley, Hunter's College in New York, and the University of Florida. In this presentation, I will be discussing my central research question, the approach I'll be using to conduct my research and its significance, what I've done, what I've learned so far, potential explanations, and what I hope to answer. The central question guiding my research is, why have ethnic studies succeeded in certain regions and university and country, but not others? This includes African American studies, Black studies, Indigenous studies, Latinx studies, Asian American studies, and so on and so forth. I plan to use historical research as my main research method. I like to learn about how the development of these ethnic studies from 1960s to present and what caused administrations to create the programs and departments that exist today. Also, I would like to look at the historical events that may have coincided with the creation of these programs and departments. To ensure that I'm getting the respective communities' histories on the subject, I will be using oral history interviews. Oral history will allow me to learn about the experiences of people who have had ethnic studies and those who have not. Furthermore, I'm curious as to how people have learned their community's history, if not through academia. There are many steps for inquiries, some which I have completed or made progress, and others which I intend to conduct. I've read about different institutions and have created ethnic studies in higher education. For example, my work as a senior doctoral history program has prepared me to talk about ethnic studies in regards to the University of Florida. Although I have knowledge about the University of Florida, I don't have all the information about the other institution, which is why I intend to continue to learn about ethnic studies at other institutions. I'd also like to see how ethnic studies has fared at these institutions, looking at the progress from ethnic studies from when they were created to present day. Furthermore, I will be looking into oral history archives at Hunter's College, UC Berkeley, and University of Florida. Specifically, the Louis A. Cardona Oral History Collection at Hunter's College, New York, which contains interviews with community leaders in the late 20th century, including the first director of Puerto Rican Studies. Also, the Latinx Diaspora Americas Project, the Joe Buchanan Project, and the Institution of Black Culture and La Casita Archive at the University of Florida, which contain interviews with students and faculty about their experience at the University of Florida and the lack of ethnic studies, including interviews with Dr. Paul Ortiz and Stephen P. Mickle, one of the first students to earn African American Studies Bachelor at the University of Florida. Finally, the Education University of California and Free Speech Movement collections at UC Berkeley, which contain interviews with Carlos Munoz and Ronald Takaki, which talk about student activism that founded ethnic studies at UC Berkeley. Lastly, I will be conducting more interviews with students, faculty, and administration about the current state of ethnic studies at their institution. This is to ensure I have the perspectives of people currently experiencing ethnic studies or the lack of. As you can see on the slides, there is a brief history of the creation of ethnic studies at each of these institutions, except for the University of Florida. The University of Florida has an African American Studies program for 50 years, but they haven't been able to create a department, so they're unable to award graduate degrees in that area. There is no Latinx minor or major at the University of Florida, though I've been told, why should I care, because there's a Latin American minor. Latin American and Latinx are not interchangeable. They're completely different identities and they should be treated as such. They should have their own separate areas of study. Indigenous studies is almost non-existent in UF, except for some courses in the law school. And finally, the University of Florida does have Asian American minor, but most students aren't able to finish the minor because the classes aren't offered enough for students to finish it. Through my research, I've noticed two patterns may have been the cause of the creation of ethnic studies in these institutions. As I mentioned above, the programs were created due to student activism, but I can't be sure it's the case every time, so I need to look more into it. Another possible explanation is that the creations coincide with civil rights movements. Whether they inspired the community or were part of the movement, there are some overlaps. In California, when San Francisco State and UC Berkeley ethnic studies programs were created, the LA walkouts happened shortly before. In New York, the Young Lords movement was taking place when the Center of Puerto Rican Studies was created at Hunter's College. With UF, the African American Studies program was created shortly after the Civil Rights Movement. These are the questions I hope to answer through my research. Why were ethnic studies implemented, including was it due to student activism, administrations pushing for it, or even a legal battle that caused the creation? Why have some institutions neglected ethnic studies? Specifically, why has the University of Florida neglected ethnic studies? Also, how does ethnic studies or the lack of change student experiences? These are the questions I'm trying to answer. There are questions that are emerging from my research, like what can we do to implement ethnic studies programs across the country? And if people in college benefit from ethnic studies, then should we start to implement it in elementary, middle, and high school? At this moment, I'm not done with my research, and I'm still learning about the creation of ethnic studies. I want to learn about how these programs started and the reason they started. I still intend to conduct more oral history interviews and search through archives to learn about the student experiences, and continue to read extensively about the different communities. As I mentioned above, I have some theories of why these programs started, like due to student activism or coinciding with civil rights events. I still intend to conduct more research to see how ethnic studies can be implemented at universities that lack ethnic studies. I've listed some contributions ethnic studies can have for students and institutions. And finally, here I've listed my resources for this presentation. I want to thank all of y'all for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. I want to give a special acknowledgement to Dr. Paul Ortiz of the University of Florida for being my mentor and research advisor. He's given me a lot of presentation critiques and given me the ability to present. Also want to give an acknowledgement to Dr. Barnes and Dr. C of the Ronald A. McNair Scholars Program for giving me tips and pointers and sending me resources to use for my presentation. I could not have done it without them. So I hope you all enjoyed everything I presented today, and I look forward to the critiques you all will give me for my presentation. Thank you.